For those of you just joining, my name is David August, and I am shooting this live from a great distance of the La Tuna Canyon fire. It's, I guess, just being called the La Tuna Fire in the Verdugo Mountains near Burbank. On the right, there's sort of the peak that's in the sort of right third. You can kind of see that there's red on the hills. That's fire retardant that was dropped earlier. And you can see there's a helicopter passing over the fire itself right now. And to the left, even beyond this frame, there's a lot of smoke in the hills from where, even if the fire has been extinguished, it's still letting off smoke. And you can right now see, maybe, that there was just water or retardant, I couldn't tell at this distance, drop. And there's a helicopter following after it, possibly either moving people or observers. I've been listening a little bit to some of the local police scanners through the internet, and it is a major firefighting operation. I am set up from the tallest building in downtown Burbank, the Holiday Inn. I'm on the 18th floor. I don't know if you can see that well. Unfortunately, the camera doesn't really pick it up, but I can see with my own eyes at the bottom edges of where it's smoking in the sort of center of frame. There's the orange of the actual flames themselves as they're crawling down the mountain. It might be a little more contained than it was last night. I think part of it is that the fire burned a lot of the fuel that was available. I also was driving earlier, and over in that direction, there were areas just a few feet from the road and a few feet from houses that had char, and I even saw 2 deer. One that had wandered kind of into the backyard of a house, and the other that was walking up the very charred and desolate hill. And I felt very bad for them, because they'd lost their house, or at least been driven from their house by the flames. But I get the impression that the firefighters were able to save the neighborhoods I was moving through by mere feet, which was probably a concerted effort to make sure that those houses didn't go up. But even as we're watching, I don't know how much you can tell at the resolution that might be streaming live, but the orange bottom edges of the flames on these mountains have been creeping down the mountains, and you can see there's a row of houses kind of just below dead center of frame. That row of houses in the hills that has a water tank above them. I'm guessing one of the goals is to make sure that those don't become kindling. Oh, sorry. It sounds like maybe you couldn't hear everything that I was saying. I was saying that earlier I was seeing that charred areas had gotten very close to people's houses, and I'm guessing firefighters beat them back to make sure those houses are still houses and not ash. And I saw a couple deer that were wandering because their home had just been torched. And they were very cute, but looked a little forlorn, and one of them was walking up the side of the hill that was charred, but had, since the flames had left. And a couple of minutes ago, there was a water or retardant drop from I think a helicopter, sort of near the ridgeline. You can see sort of at the top of the actual mountains themselves. Jimmy just said the end is nigh. I'm not so sure the end is nigh. I think because of a lot of brave men and women fighting this fire, and making sure that it doesn't burn down the actual places people live. The end may not be so nigh. However, the telecommunications towers that you see on the top of the ridgeline, they might be obscured by smoke in your view. I'm not sure whether or not those are in peril, but I think some of the red staining that you can see on the mountains themselves were from retardant drops to try to make sure that the flames didn't continue going, and I think some of those might have been placed to protect some of the structures that are up in the mountains. It is very hot here today, which is not helping. We could use some rain, but these clouds don't look like rain clouds. And because of the size of this fire, from what I understand online, it's starting to generate some of its own weather impacts. Just because you have this much smoke and hot air, it changes what the local weather is going to be. I'm going to try to slowly pan the camera. Since it's a live stream, it might not be as smooth as it would be if it weren't. But this, you can see there's a sort of center of frame. I don't know if you can see it. There's a big billowing column of flame that's far enough away it doesn't look very big from here, but I'm guessing that those flames are jumping 10, 15, 20 feet in the air. And to our left, you can see the smoke and some of the smoldering from the hills from earlier. There are some areas on the other side of this ridgeline towards sort of Tujunga and Sunland that are under mandatory evacuation orders. So if you are in those areas and someone has mandatorily evacuated you, I hope that you have evacuated and you have left and are now somewhere else safe. There are, from what I understand, a couple different Red Cross shelters if you need to go somewhere and cool. One of them is McCambridge Park in Burbank, and one of them is a high school I don't remember the name of because I don't know exactly where it is, but I think it's in either Tujunga or Sunland. And I believe there are some places if you have pets and you need to go and you need to keep your pets cool too. I don't, because I'm using my phone to live stream, I don't have that information readily available, but a quick search on either Google or Twitter and you should be able to find those resources. 3 homes have only been lost, says Aaron. That actually sounds like a lower number than I would have expected because this is the largest brush fire in LA history, and in sort of slightly left of center frame there's a sort of valley that is right now getting consumed with flames. I'm not sure if you can see it, and I can zoom in. Oh, this is good. I didn't realize that YouTube would let me zoom in. Aaron Kaiser makes a very excellent point that Burbank PD, the @BurbankPD Twitter account, has been a very good source of information in terms of evacuations and such. So now I've zoomed in right on where there are flames crawling down the mountain, burning everything in their path. I'm not an official safety person, but if I lived in those houses that were down the hill from there, even though they're still a significant distance away, I might want to consider getting ready to evacuate, which means putting your important documents together, prescription drugs together, a change of clothes, anything you're going to need for your pets, your kids, the rest of your family, and be ready to maybe get into the car and leave. Of course, wait for the official pronouncement, but might be a good idea to start getting ready on the off chance. Even if you just gather those things, make sure you have them available. That might be a good idea. So those flames, it's hard to tell in this view, are probably well over a mile from me. So while they don't look necessarily that big on screen in person, they look very terrifyingly large, and you can actually tell that they're moving relatively quickly. So while I doubt anyone anywhere near it is actually watching this, if you are, you might want to put some distance between yourself and them. And while the biggest current cluster of flames is that flame cluster just left of the center of frame, there are orange edges which are partly obscured by smoke more towards the center and just right of center, as the fire line seems to be moving down the hill, as fires want to do. I chose where I am partly because I am so far away that I'm not in the way of any emergency vehicles, but I do not suggest anyone try to get super close to these unless you are actually emergency personnel, just because we want to make sure that the fire trucks and the ambulances and the police don't have traffic they have to fight with to get to where they need to go. Nature is scary. From what I understand, the 210 freeway, which is on the other side of this mountain range, which is the Verdugo Mountains, has been closed in both directions because the fire was on both sides of it, and I did see a picture that had been posted by one of the news people, and some of the guardrails had actually caught fire themselves, so I'm guessing that that highway might be due for some renovation after this. If you know anyone who's near this fire who has lung problems, you might want to check on them because the air quality has gone down a bit. I myself am planning to later put some distance between myself and this just to breathe some fresh air. I don't know if you can tell the resolution on this live stream, but there are individual little columns of smoke right near the center of frame coming off of orange flames that are crawling down the mountain. It's a terrifyingly large campfire type situation. Earlier today I heard jets flying overhead, which usually this area is not actually in a flight path, but they were firefighting planes making their retardant and I think possibly water runs. I did see earlier a retardant run. You can sort of tell the difference because that's red. So Aaron has graciously offered to help evacuate any attractive female friends I may have near here. Hopefully that will not be necessary. But I also overheard on the scanner there was someone who was throwing a party not far from the fire line, and there were 40 people there. That's 40. Probably not a great idea. If you're going to set up a party, it would probably be better to do it something like in city. Go to one of those hotels, get a hotel room that has a view of this, and that way we're well out of harm's way and out of the way of the emergency responders. That would be about the only place I'd say having a fire party might not be a bad idea. So even just the time I've been live streaming this, I think the ridge that's sort of center frame has, more of it has been engulfed in the flame and now is obscured by the smoke. So Aaron just said that there's a rumor that this might have been caused by a lit cigarette, but that's not an official source. My guess would be there will be extensive investigation into what the causes of this were. It could have been something as simple as a lightning strike, because I know there were some unexpected sort of thunder showers and lightning things earlier in the week, and sometimes things like wildfires get started by that. But I also know places like the Hollywood Hills, it's illegal to smoke even in your car because the thinking is one unextinguished cigarette is enough to cause this kind of damage. So yes, let this be a sort of Smokey Bear moment. Only you can prevent horrifyingly large wildfires. I'm sorry if the connection's coming in and out. I think that has to do more with the cell network that I'm on. I'm going to zoom out to give a little context. So we've been looking there, but this whole range has had quite a bit of fire on it in the last just over 24 hours or so. Mark, that's an excellent question. I'm filming from Burbank, and I do believe that there are firefighters from Burbank, Glendale, LA City, LA County, and possibly other places. I myself saw police officers from Burbank, Glendale, San Marino, which is actually in the San Bernardino Valley, and South Pasadena. So it sounds like there have been quite a lot of jurisdictions that have contributed to this effort, which is very nice. I'm very glad that they're doing that, because this is kind of scary. I think there have been a lot of houses very close to harm's way, and this is WDAN, David August News, the David August News Network, broadcasting live on 3G because LTE is for some reason not available right now, from my iPhone SE on youtube.com. Available at youtube.com/DavidAugustActor. Sorry, I'm not actually a news broadcaster. Yeah, I can smell the fire. I'm not seeing ashes right now. I do know earlier my car had a fair amount of ash on it, and that there has been ash. I've heard unconfirmed reports as far as Sherman Oaks, which is many miles from here, have had ash coming down on them. The winds and the weather have not been helping. It's very dry, it's very hot, and from what I understand, in the mountains where the fire is happening, there are gusts of wind, which has a nasty habit of fanning the flames, and also the potential of taking burning embers and moving them from one place to another to spread the fire more quickly. But I can smell the fire from here. The wind right now is not blowing everything in my direction exactly. You can kind of see the columns of smoke are moving to the left, towards the north, and Aaron makes a good point. Thank you, Mark. I am intending to stay safe. I am right now. You can see there's a fair amount of city between me and the fire, and I'm probably a mile or two away from the flames that are actually on camera. Zooming in and repositioning a little to try to give you a closer shot. So yes, I suppose Aaron makes a good point. I'm a little bit of a citizen journalist at this point. I'm looking at, there's a Cartoon Network building that has a helipad on it, and they have a windsock so that helicopter pilots will be able to see what way the wind is going. And as far as I can tell there, which is slightly to the left of what I'm shooting, the wind seems to be heading sort of northwest rather. And I'm right now pretty due west of what I'm, so the smoke is not heading my direction, but there's an awful lot of smoke. I've seen pictures that people have taken from Chatsworth and even Santa Monica where they can see the column of smoke in the air. On the right side of frame, the farthest most right, you can see a little bit of orange. There seems to be some flames growing on that edge of this fire, which, if nature has nature's way, I'm guessing the fire will keep going. You can also see that there's a plane probably entering frame just about now on the far right, just above the ridge. It's either a plane or a helicopter. By the way it's moving, it actually looks like a helicopter. And it's just gone behind the ridge. So the air quality is low. My car seemed to think that it was just over 100 degrees. Judging by the temperature in the air, it's at least in the 90s or the hundreds. That's an excellent point. Aaron says there were no mandatory evacuations as far as I know in Burbank or Glendale, but there were on the other side of the mountain in Sunland and Tujunga. That could change. I know that the LA Fire Department, LA City has an alerts page that while it's in beta, they had updated this morning with some of that information. But if you want to keep up to date, I would either check something like the official Twitters of these agencies, or pay attention if there's law enforcement driving down your street telling that you need to evacuate, then evacuate. From Aaron Kaiser, our weather guru in Glendale, California, earlier it was 102 degrees, and now the temperature is 99 degrees. And in the far right of the frame, you can see there's a big column of flame creating some black smoke. I'm not sure exactly what's burning, but I was hearing on the scanner earlier when there were some tires that caught fire, they were causing black smoke. Oh, Aaron says there had been some mandatory evacuations in Burbank. That makes some sense. I also know there were a couple places that had been evacuated, but they allowed people to return. You'll have to check online because I can't look right now. Mark asks if smoke cover makes it cooler in the near area. Well, right up on the fire, if you were firefighting it, as in feet from it, it's possible that the smoke might cause some shade, but that's probably offset by the temperature created by the flames themselves. And Aaron is going to try to send a map earlier, a map in a bit of where there has been evacuations. I looked at a map earlier that had come from, I think, the LA County Fire Air Operations, and they showed a very large area that had already been consumed. Someone had been banding about the number 500 acres that were in fire. I imagine that has grown significantly since this morning, despite some very brave and, in many cases, very effective efforts. The firefighting resources are not infinite, and this is a very large, in fact, the largest, I think, ever firefighting. There's a helicopter now. I don't know if you can see it through the smoke, about center frame moving towards the right of frame. And I'm not sure if it's an observation helicopter that's coordinating the fight, or if it is a water drop helicopter capable of fighting it directly. Aaron makes the point that he doesn't think clouds would lower the temperature. I tend to agree that that probably wouldn't lower the temperature. I'm going to zoom out a little bit to show you a little more both context and something that I've noticed. So I'm going to turn the camera a little, and I'm going to try to zoom in on what I was seeing. There's, I don't know if you can see it, but there looks like there's a floodlight in the hills. It's sort of there. There's a light sort of, here I'll put it in the center of frame. That floodlight, I believe, is, thank you very much for sending me the map, Aaron, I will check it later. That floodlight, you can see slightly to the right of it, there's some white objects. Those, I believe, are trailers. I'm not positive, because I don't have confirmation, but I think that might be one of the command centers set up, because that is possibly the Verdugo Green helispot, which I was hearing on the scanners. There's a couple places in the Verdugo Mountains where helicopters can touch down to coordinate and pick up firefighters, drop off firefighters, supplies, that kind of thing. I believe they might be doing some water operations where they may bring water to those places and may, not necessarily right there where center frame, but may actually be using water or flame retardant staged from those areas. But that bright spot towards the center frame is a floodlight. I think of one of the official command type operations centers. Again, I don't have confirmation on that, but that's what I gather from what I've seen. The Burbank B does look like it's in danger. The good news is the Burbank B, as far as I know, is made of stone, so it might not be particularly susceptible to catching on fire itself. I'm now going to re-zoom in on the flames in the mountains themselves. Sorry about this, it's taking me a second to lock this off. So yeah, you can see the orange in the frame sort of towards the right edge of some of those columns of smoke, and there's a little bit of orange in the left, just left of center. Those are columns of flame as the various foliage and whatever else is on that mountain catches fire. I also imagine, kind of like the 2 deer I saw earlier that were displaced, there's a fair amount of wildlife that's going to be coming out of these mountains, whether it's coyotes or rabbits or deer, which could give some of the people who live in these houses a up-close and personal visit from wild animals. Probably best not to approach them because they're probably spooked and stressed, what with their house being on fire. Towards the very left of this range, you can see some of what looks like the ash in the decimated areas. I'm going to move the camera and show you what I'm talking about. Those mountains in the distance, I'm not sure if through the smoke on this live stream you can see, but that mountain towards the center doesn't have what looks like anything green on it. And I'm seeing with my own eyes, it looks like white, like ash, and black mainly is the colors. But this is, from what I understand and when I last looked at a map, this is possibly the sort of southwest-ish edge of where the Tuna fire is burning things. And the orange you see on the lower edges of where the smoke is coming off the mountains, in person I can see more detail, is a lot of scary looking flames. There's a lot of plant life getting vaporized into the air. Yeah, I agree with you, Aaron. I kind of wish I had finished Red Cross training or CERT training to be trying to help. I think most of it is they need actually trained firefighters or law enforcement. I imagine if anyone's watching this and is in the area, and if you are a firefighter or law enforcement from another jurisdiction, say you're traveling or on vacation, if you would like to help out, I imagine you could do so. My best bet, again, don't have confirmation, would be going to a police station or a fire station and asking them if you could assist. I believe that the Red Cross has a couple shelters. I know one of them is at McCambridge Park, which is in Burbank, and I believe there's at least one other that may be on the other side of this mountain range. And if you are a Red Cross volunteer, you could go help. I did go to Costco and picked up some Gatorade and dropped it off on a pile near a police cruiser near their edge. And from what I was told, there's a van that the fire departments are using to ferry supplies and such, because there's a lot of people working in some heat, carrying a lot of heavy equipment. I'm glad they are, because I think if they weren't, there would be a lot of people whose houses would end up going up. Right now, right of frame, approaching what you're seeing, there are 2 firefighting planes, fixed-wing aircraft coming in on firefighting runs. It's probably entering frame now, right above the ridge. It might be obscured. There it is on the right. And it's just dropping what looks like water because it's white. The flame retardant that I've seen so far today, I think, is red. But there's another plane coming in right after it on a similar vector. And it doesn't look like it released. Oh, there it is, it's releasing now. My guess is trying to stop the edge of this fire from continuing to move south along this ridgeline. That's my guess, because I can't, while I'm live streaming, be listening to a scanner on my phone. It's hard to tell at this distance and through the smoke, but it's possible some of the flames that were towards the right edge of what you're seeing might not be there anymore, which is sort of gratifying to see. Mark makes a good point that because we had a wet winter, it allowed a lot of the plants to grow, which creates the fuel From what I understand, fire is created by what used to be called the fire triangle, but is now called the fire pyramid. The fire triangle, as far as I understand it, again, I'm not a firefighting expert, is fuel, air, and heat. But the fire pyramid is fuel, air, heat, and an underlying chemical reaction. And when fighting fire, including one if you happen to have a cooking accident, getting in the way of any one of those four elements, fuel, oxygen, heat, and the underlying chemical reaction, is the way you stop fire. If you have a cooking accident, that's sometimes why you put the lid on the pot or the pan. That denies oxygen to it. The fire uses up all the oxygen it has, and then it dies because it doesn't have that oxygen. Fuel is one of the reasons why fire departments want you to clear the brush around your house or your business so that there's nothing for the fire to burn, because if it doesn't have something to burn, it's probably not going to make it to your house or your business. And the underlying chemical reaction, I think, is a little more important for things that are like chemical fires, not like this. Aaron makes a good point. Probably not a good idea to drink a bunch of alcohol and then try to urinate on the fire to extinguish it. Probably best to use things that are fire extinguishers and make sure that you're using the right fire extinguisher, because if you use the wrong one on a grease fire, you might not put it out as well. And if you're dealing with something like a chemical fire and you don't know what you're doing, it's probably best to just get out of there and call professionals who know what they're doing and tell them what's on fire. But this isn't a chemical fire as far as I know. This is pretty much a fairly standard issue, large scale wildfire, which means plants and trees and grasses. Mark made the point that because of the rains, we had a lot of growth. Earlier, that meant there were a lot of wildflowers blooming that hadn't bloomed in recent years, but a lot of those very same flowers are now fueling this fire. When I was hiking in these mountains in the spring, I saw a lot more wildflowers on some of the paths than I'd seen in previous years. I'm going to zoom out a little to give more context. So if you have any questions, feel free to click over to YouTube and ask them in the comments. I will answer them as best I can. I'm not a firefighting professional, and I'm not in real time looking at what the firefighting professionals are saying and posting online and to the press. For those of you just joining, we are looking at a live shot of part of the Tuna Fire. From what I understand, it's the largest fire in LA City history, which means without being in a plane or from satellite, it's probably not possible to get the whole thing in the fire. The average wingspan of an African swallow, well, it probably depends, Mr. Kaiser, on how old that swallow is, because when they're newborns, they're going to be a much smaller wingspan than when they're wide. But an African swallow, off the top of my head, without Googling it, I'm going to say that its wingspan's about 4 or 5 feet, because I think that's a relatively large bird. But I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm not an expert on African wildlife, nor am I on African swallows specifically. But I appreciate the question. I think the next non sequitur question is going to be, just kidding. I'm guessing in the coming days and weeks, NASA may share imagery that they have of this fire, because they have various earth science and space science programs that look at things like this and monitor what's going on in the world. I did do the Costco run I mentioned. I picked up some Gatorade and dropped it off for the firefighters that are working in this heat. But I believe Costco and other places are still open. If you're interested in helping with the effort, but you're not a professional firefighter or EMT or law enforcement, I do believe that they could use water and Gatorade because they have a lot of people working in some pretty extreme heat. And the best way to get it to them is probably to go to your nearest police station or fire station and ask them where the best place would be for you to drop it off. And keep in mind that they have sometimes critical things or injuries that are going to take precedence in terms of traffic, so be patient. But you can sometimes drop those things off, and it is a nice way to help the citizens who are helping protect all of us. And when I was at the Costco in Burbank, they did have a fair amount of Gatorade of various varieties still available. I believe it is in aisle 128. How's that for excessively specific guidance? It's really hot out here. What flavor do firefighters like? My guess would be that it depend upon the firefighter. I got the one that was sort of the traditional flavors, the fruit and the, I believe, lemon lime flavors, but there's a lot of other ones out there, and I would imagine it depends upon which firefighter's drinking, which flavor they like. At this point, my guess would be they'd just be grateful for the support from the citizenry. So Aaron asked if I'd marked myself safe on Facebook. I had not yet, because I figured I would do that when I was several miles from this. It's a little strange to mark oneself safe, but if you or someone you love is anywhere near this, it can give peace of mind to people for them to know that you were safe and not actually hiking in the mountains, for instance, when all this started. So I am going to mark myself safe later. I've already texted most of the people that would possibly worry, but I will post that on Facebook. I feel like it's sort of a nice way for people to not worry about each other, and also doesn't do things like tie up the phone lines. I think that's the main reason why Facebook created it. It was a good way, social media-wise, for everyone to let their friends and family know that they were safe without having to tie up phone lines, which sometimes get congested when things happen. So, in the sort of upper right quadrant of the screen, you can see some of the yellow, orangish colored edges of the flames as they're climbing down the mountains. Now I think there is, in terms of human infrastructure, some pipes and wires that do go over these mountains, and you can see almost in the dead center of the screen that white object that seems to be separated and above the houses. That is a water tank, which I believe is either traditional sort of municipal water that feeds your showers, or it may actually be water that is placed there for use in firefighting. I'm not actually sure what that tank specifically is for, but I'm guessing as these flames climb down the mountain, the possibility of things like that tank and the houses below being in its path has been part of the reason why we earlier saw those firefighting airplanes making their runs. At the sort of top area of the center of the screen, you can see through the smoke the outlines and silhouettes of a couple of the radio towers that are on the top of these mountains, because they have a good vantage over both this side of the mountains and the other side. I'm not sure how close those towers actually are to the edge of this fire, but I would imagine that the operators of the tower have hopefully done good brush removal to try to keep the fire from destroying their telecommunications equipment. But I don't know, because I'm not a professional who does this. I'm just guessing. Aaron makes a good point, trying to come up with a good joke about what flavor Gatorade people who fight fires would want to drink. It strikes me, isn't there something like a fiery cherry flavor? Or am I thinking of like Hubba Bubba bubblegum? I'm not sure what would be the best flavor. Possibly something like Arctic Ice, just because something cool and refreshing sounds good. I would also imagine if one wants to make donations to people who might be displaced by this, you could reach out to the Red Cross, because the Red Cross is not first responders, they're kind of second responders. and they might be able to give guidance on what items are actually needed, food, clothes-wise, by people who might be displaced by this fire. There's some very dark smoke coming up on the edge of this smoke, right where there's some flames that seem to have grown in the last few seconds on the right edge of this fire line. And I'm not sure exactly what it is that's burning that burns so much darker than the rest. Aaron is trying to hold himself, and I'm guessing his house, up as a shelter for any attractive women who might be evacuated, which I'm not sure if that's the best dating tactic, but it's creative. If I had more than one camera, I would shoot a time lapse of this too, because I'm sure over time watching the edge of the fire flames step down the mountain would be both impressive and terrifying. This is true, Mark. Having an apartment with a view can definitely pay off in times like this, but I'm not sure if I've ever heard a realtor say it has great wildfire views as a selling point. I think Aaron's right. He says that darker smoke probably means man-made materials are burning, which makes sense because I think some things like tires and some plastics tend to give off a darker smoke than plant life. That's entirely common, that's entirely possible. It could be power poles. It could also be mountings for pipings, for pipes, because I think there are some pipes that run over this range. Mark says that we could, with climate change, have more common wildfires. I think that the U.S. Forestry Service and the various agencies that oversee things that tend to turn into wildfires in the United States have changed their thinking since the 60s, since the 1960s, on how to try to prevent this kinds of thing. And it used to be that the policy was to extinguish all fires and let none of them burn, which sometimes meant that you ended up with a very large amount of fuel accumulating, because the natural cycle is actually for these areas to end up with wildfires, cleaning out the fuel every certain number of years, so you don't end up with as much fuel in one place. So controlled burns and cutting back trees, as Aaron says, are one of the ways to try to make sure that this kind of thing doesn't happen. As far as I know, during the time I've lived in LA, which is about 10 years, I haven't heard of anyone doing controlled burns in this mountain range. That doesn't mean they haven't, I just haven't been aware of them. But I also think we have weather contributing to this fire burning as much as it is, because it is very dry and hot. Right now, sort of towards the center of the frame, there's a bunch of flames that just grew as, I'm guessing, either a tree or some other dense amount of vegetation has caught fire. And on the right edge, you still have a little bit of that dark smoke, possibly coming from something man-made burning. But you can see along the lower edge of where all the smoke is coming from, all the orange of the fire. Aaron points out that the Silmar fire a few years ago was not too far from here, and it was a bit further north of here, which is true. I also know almost 10 years ago, there was a fire in some of the same kind of area. So that might have reduced some of the fuel, but 10 years is a fair amount of time for all that fuel to grow back. This should be an object lesson that if you have a house or even an apartment building or an office, you should make sure that you're taking good care of cutting back the brush as needed, because it can save the structure, it can save firefighters from having to risk their life because the flames are getting too close to the structures. So yeah, some good preventative brush cutting back is probably a good idea. So I'm zooming out a little so you can see how much fire there has been on this mountainside. Last night it was particularly intimidating because there were flames kind of like, let's see if I can zoom in on that, like these flames, and in the dark they looked like the mountains were very angry. So this valley, until a few minutes ago, I wasn't seeing flames in it. I was seeing flames back here, where there still are flames. But it looks like there's been a little bit of a flare up there, and you can see with the column of smoke that's coming, there's a lot of stuff burning there. I'm not sure if that was just unburnt material that suddenly caught or what it is exactly. But it's right now sort of the densest column of smoke coming off this area. Nature's scary. We should respect nature because nature's going to burn us up. So some of the smoke in this column looks darker than the other smoke on the mountain, which, as Aaron pointed out, might mean that it's something that isn't vegetation burning. It could be something man-made. I don't know if there's a structure up right there, but the flames are clearly crawling up the face of the mountain that we can't see, that's just behind that ridge, because they're starting to hit the top now. It is an awesomely terrifying sight to see with your own eyes, and I hope it's coming through on this live stream. I'm going to see if I can put my phone on this railing to make it more stable of a shot. I'm not an expert, but those big fingers of flame that are on the top of that ridge now look scary tall. We're a couple miles away and they're pretty big. Aaron just said that the sunset looks very beautiful, but that would be the other direction from where I'm looking. With the sun setting, one of the good news is that might make it slightly cooler, which might make it slightly harder for the fire to move. But the downside is, I believe most of the air operations, both moving people and flame retardant and water onto the fire, is something they don't do usually at night, because as you can tell, the topography, if you make a mistake, you'll crash into a mountain. And in the dark, I'm not sure they'd want to take that kind of risk. So I don't believe they do water drops at night. I'm not sure, but I don't think they do. So that unfortunately means that the fire doesn't have that adversary to deal with at night. But yeah, this column that we're looking at right now, a few minutes ago, was just a small amount of smoldering, and it seems to have really flared up in the last even less than 5 minutes. So we're hearing from my correspondent in Glendale, because I'm in Burbank, that this column of smoke is now starting to be visible in Glendale, which makes sense. That's a scary level of smoke. There's a lot of stuff combusting extremely quickly. So now that whole ridge is on fire, and the fire probably burned as quickly as it did up the opposite ridge, because fire, like most things that are hot, goes up. So the fire seems to climb mountains faster than it comes down from mountains. But that's an awful lot of smoke. I'm not sure what portion of this fire might be contained, but given how quickly it has become such a big fire, I think the fire is still dictating terms for a lot of this. Over here, we have a plane that just did a water drop, I think trying to stop the movement of the fire that's there. And there's this big column of smoke over here. Oh, that would be cool if I were streaming with my laptop. I could add Aaron as a remote camera and we could do this news team style. This is David August, live from Burbank, California, where there is an awful lot of stuff burning extremely quickly in the last 5 to 10 minutes. This area 5 to 10 minutes ago only had the slightest bit of smoke smoldering, kind of like that was, but now has become engulfed in flame as this very big column of smoke is rising into the blue sky. And as the flames are jumping as high as they are, there's clearly a fair amount of fuel for this fire to consume right there. Oh yes, Aaron just pointed out my call sign, WDAN, the David August News Network. All the news that David August tells you all the time. Okay, I'm putting you back on the tripod so that we have a nice solid shot of this. And I'm going to zoom it out ever so slightly for a little more context. So yeah, as you can see a little bit on camera, in person, there's a wall of fire on the right edge of that line that is climbing further up the slight incline immediately to its right.
Hi.
Hi.
I stopped to say hi.
If you could look up, Aaron just offered to look things up on my laptop. He is my research team back in the studio in Glendale. If you could see if there is any percentage that has been shared publicly of what is contained, because we are looking at one edge of this fire, but this fire is so large that there might be other areas that are more contained than what we're looking at this moment. Also, if you could look up what shelters, if anyone needs to evacuate and or evacuate with pets, what shelters are currently open and accepting people, that would be great. So it looks like some of the flames that are creating this column of smoke are actually behind the ridge line. It's hard to see in a two-dimensional video, but what you're seeing, the orange bottom edge of this column of smoke, is actually the highest point of that ridge, and there's a bit of a valley behind it. And from what I'm guessing by the amount of smoke that's coming off of it, this smoke is, all the vegetation there is burning, and that's what's generating this white, almost brown column of smoke. So there must have been some dense vegetation or other things that are catching fire. I don't think that high up there were a lot of human structures. You can kind of see just below the column of smoke, just to the right, there's a slight white speck. That, I believe, is the floodlight of possibly a command center that was set up in a parking lot up there of some of the people who are bravely fighting this fire. And I'm guessing that they have noticed that these flames are coming towards them. I'm not sure, because of the distance, exactly how far away the bottom edge of this smoke is from that white speck in the mountains. But there's a helicopter, I think it's a helicopter, that has just flown between us and this column of smoke. And I'm guessing they're partly flying there to see and understand what is going on, and they're turning back now. Needless to say, if you have a drone, this is not the place to try to fly it, because there's some very dangerous maneuvers that are having to be done by both the helicopters and the fixed-wing aircraft fighting this. Now you can see the flames through the smoke. Those flames are so tall that they're starting to make the inside of this chamber of smoke glow orange. It's terrifyingly beautiful. And I can see from where I'm standing, I'm not sure how much it's coming out on camera. That makes sense. So Aaron just said that they're not, the LA Fire Department is very possibly not allowing people to drop stuff off at the command center, which is absolutely true. What your best bet is going to be is, if you were near here, to ask one of the law enforcement officers on the peripheral area in the perimeter, to ask them where is the best place for them to drop it. I made a drop right next to a police cruiser that was on the edge, and then the fire department takes it from there, because you want to make sure that the emergency vehicles can get through. So Aaron says that Mayor Garcetti, who's the mayor of LA City, signed a declaration of local emergency about 46 minutes ago on his Twitter. Now, my guess is that enables certain resources to be dedicated to fighting this fire and managing its consequences. That's usually what happens when governments declare an official emergency. It allows them to do certain things that they couldn't do if they hadn't declared an official emergency. It also may be preamble if they're going to try to reach out for state resources. So the fire has consumed 5,000 acres and was 10% contained as of 2 hours ago. Aaron Kaiser in the studio. And Annie is sending him some stuff. We now have a 3-person news team reporting on this. So if you want to help reaching out to people like the Red Cross and finding out what they need, because they often serve a coordinating function to coordinate the various agencies that try to provide relief for the people who may be displaced by this. And if you want to help local law enforcement, actually one of the best things you can do is stay clear of this area. And if they give you a voluntary evacuation order, seriously consider doing it. If they give you a mandatory evacuation order, absolutely evacuate. Because you don't want law enforcement and firefighters to have to be put in harm's way to save you because you couldn't be bothered to evacuate when they told you you needed to. Remember, people and pets can't be replaced. Everything else can. So just get the people, the pets, maybe some important documents, your prescription drugs, and get out of the way if you need to. So this column of smoke is not seemingly fueled by quite as fierce flames that are visible from here as it was some minutes ago, but it doesn't seem to be showing any signs that there aren't flames still fueling this column of smoke that came about within the last 10 to 20 minutes from what had been looking like just a small amount of smoldering. I would imagine if anyone's on a commercial flight that's flying over LA, you can probably look out the right window and see this, because this column of smoke is very high. I'm not sure exactly how high, but I'm gonna guess at least 1,000 feet. It's probably visible from a significant distance as well. I know earlier the smoke was visible from places like Santa Monica, which is a non-trivial number of miles from here. And what you're looking at is the Verdugo mountain range from the Burbank side. And it seems just under an hour ago, Mayor Garcetti declared this a local emergency. I also have to say I'm very impressed and glad that our law enforcement and firefighting agencies have been coordinating this as effectively as they have, because this is a very large area to try to deploy resources to fight this fire, which, according to Annie and Aaron back in the studio remotely, is 10% contained as of 2 hours ago, which means it's 90% not yet contained, which is not as good a number as it hopefully will be in the coming hours and days. So I'm going to zoom a little back out and reorient a little. So that, on the left, that big column of smoke is relatively new from an area that I'm guessing had not yet burned and is now much more severely burned in the last 20 minutes. On the right, you can see the right edge of the line of fire climbing down the mountain into a little bit of a crevice, sort of a mini valley. I'm not sure what the right word is for it. That orange on the right are flames, and also on the bottom edges of where the smoke is coming from, there are also flames that are visible, slightly more visible with my eyes than they are with my cell phone's camera. So I can see on the ridge line, just to the right of the orange cluster of flames, I see a red flashing light I did not see before, which is possibly, I didn't see it because it was obscured by smoke, or it could be firefighters, and that could be a red flashing light so that people can see them and know where they are. But it's definitely rhythmically flashing. Let's see if I can zoom in on it, shall we? That's about as much as I can zoom in. I'm not sure if it's showing up on camera, sort of through the smoke, just to the right of that sort of top right cluster of flames. And then back to our left, behind this column of smoke, you can see on the left side, there's some flames that are crawling up the mountain, burning some unburned material very brightly in a sort of a red-orange color. And I'm going to move the camera a little so you can see the clouds in the background as the sun is starting to set have taken on kind of a pink-red color. And this is an intimidating amount of fire, and this is only part of the fire. And your eyes do not deceive you. The orange fringes of where the smoke's coming from are flames. And my guess is as the sun goes down, they'll take on their sort of eerie night look. So I think I'm gonna wrap this up because I need to get dinner and the sun is going to go down. But thank you very much for watching. Be safe. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, let me know on Twitter, and I will try to respond to any questions, comments, or concerns. Thank you for watching.